talk about loss. So, loss is usually talked about in the sense of death. You lost your mother or your father or someone you care about and will never see again, and that feeling of loss falls at least somewhat under grief. But what about the other kinds of loss? See, when I was about 7 or 8, one of my cousins was shot by her friend in the back of her head. She, along with her sister and my other cousin, were at a friend's house. He was a teenager. He said, "Oh, I have a gun. Let's play Russian roulette." And they obviously were like, "No," and they tried to leave. And as she was leaving, he shot her anyway. So I don't remember her as a person. I remember her funeral. I remember going to the courtroom and waiting. The family wasn't allowed in to watch justice not be served, and I remember hearing my parents talk about it for years and years afterwards. I remember hearing that she was bright, that the boy only got off because he was white and she was black. I felt the loss of who she was in the family, but grief? No, I can't remember her at all. Certainly not enough to feel grief over. And the other deaths in my family are pretty similar. 2 grandparents, one from each side, died of cancer. And though I do remember them, I remember one more than the other, I don't exactly miss them. I hardly knew them besides as a fixture of the house they lived in. And I could attribute this to the general apathy I felt for years due to my depression. I mean, there were certainly signs of it that young. Depression is pretty common for type 1 diabetics, but that would ignore that I felt other kinds of loss, far more acutely. So there isn't really a word for when you lose a friendship, especially when the person is still alive or still in your life, and it's just the quality of the friendship that has changed. My best friend in high school was someone I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life knowing. I've always expected a pretty short deadline. Since I was 14, I've always thought that I was going to die before 30, either by my own hand or just in general because of the diabetes and the eventual complications. And I'm not sure I'm going to disprove that. We'll see. But in every version of the future that I envisioned, I always expected her to be there. Part of my attachment was because she was my first real love. And I loved her and she knew it. And sometimes we could ignore that I loved her and she knew that I loved her and I knew that she knew that I knew that, all that, etc. And sometimes we couldn't. We ended up not being friends because of me. My depression was taking over my life in every way that interacted with people. I couldn't compartmentalize and I couldn't get help at the time. It was inevitable. It really wasn't anything more than circumstance. But I still think about her. I still mourn the future that I envisioned with her, and I miss having her in my life. I miss saying something and knowing that she would know immediately what came next. I miss setting up a joke I found on Tumblr and having her interrupt with a punchline. Other kinds of friendships are ones I still maintain, but they aren't what they used to be. The lack of serious problems in high school, no rent, no money trouble, no wondering where my next meal would come from, it allowed us to relate differently. Now we're all chasing different things. I was recently almost homeless. Most of my friends have good relationships with their parents and don't have to work through college. Their main concerns are just having good grades and what to do to cure summer boredom. And we used to see each other every day for 8 or more hours together in the same place. And now we're lucky to see each other twice a year. It's still there, we're still friends, and it's still working, but it's like a car battery needing a jump. It's not what it used to be, and I'm really sad that that's past. How do you mourn yourself? I miss the person I used to be just as much as I hate her. It's a little contradictory, but I do miss the way I used to behave, how I used to feel. I used to be carefree. I am different now. The patterns that make up who I am are different than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. And it's growth, of course, and I don't resent that. I just know that the person I used to be is dead in a sense, in the same way that the person that you were when you were a year younger is dead or assimilated into this new version of you. I feel grief for that naivety I used to have and the positive outlook on life. Even in my worst times, I always thought that there was hope on the horizon, and now it's really hard to remember how that used to feel. you can feel the loss of a certain future the same way you could feel the loss of any certainty in your life. That's on me for buying into the fantasy that my first girlfriend and I would manage to make it work out, but it still hurts. I imagined us living together, spending holidays with each other, and I know it's not going to happen, but I still think about it. I still want it, and I still feel like I lost something despite never having it to begin with. And finally, they may call it estrangement, but it's more complicated than that. A lot of people have shitty relationships with their parents. It's pretty common. But I've been mourning that relationship since I was young. I haven't had that. You come to your parents and you trust they'll do the best thing for you, that they'll trust and love you no matter what you do. I haven't had that. Even before I came out, things weren't great. The ideal way that a child pictures their parents just wasn't my reality. My parents got married because my mom was pregnant and my dad wasn't going to walk out on that. They got divorced and they got back together again because of me. And my diabetes has always been an additional strain. Of course, being a fourth grader, being 8, and having to take care of this, it's hard. And I do somewhat resent that mom expected me to be mature enough to handle that. Even if I was a mature child, you can't expect a fourth grader to not want to eat pizza with her friends. And the little stupid stuff that I lie about, like my blood sugar's fine, I can have the cake. It just became a habit, and I got in trouble a lot because of that. I wanted to be like the other kids, and I couldn't, and it was really hard to understand that there was consequences for not following these health regimens. My mother also just seemed to resent that I was mature in some areas but not in others, and I don't know what to do about that. And then later, when I came out, it wasn't my choice. And I'd give anything to take it back and pretend it didn't happen. But after that point, almost every argument was centered around the fact that I couldn't change, no matter how hard I wanted to or how often I tried to, who I liked. Friends who legitimately trusted their parents, who didn't come home to broom raids or fight over who they could go to homecoming with, made me intensely jealous. I wanted that so badly, and even though they were in my life for a while after those arguments, I've always known that we were going to be like this one day, that one day we wouldn't be speaking, that one day one person or another would say, this is enough, and that'd be it. And I've always mourned that I haven't been able to have that same experience. A lot of people I know, a lot of my friends, their parents are going to support them through college. Their parents are there. If they have an emergency, their parents will be there, and they're not going to chastise them and make them feel shitty about it. I mean, we can only ignore reality for so long, and I guess I should be happy we made it this far, right? So I'm aware this isn't my usual thing, but when T.S. Eliot said that April was the cruelest month, I think he actually meant June. Because it's an introspective month. It's right when I should be happy again, and then every year I'm not. It's really hard to tell what part of this year's me is from COVID, and what part is from the hardships I had to deal with last year during COVID. Loss has been the motif of the year for me, and I just wanted to talk about it. There is more to loss than just grief. At least death is a finality. With any other kind of loss, there's always a hope that something will change, and that's the bitterest part of it all. So this, dear viewers, is where we part. If you've been here with me for a while, thanks. I refuse to make another video on the whole Creepshow art thing because ultimately, I don't care. I've gotten a lot of criticism, or really just insults, and to be honest, neither means that much to me. If I wouldn't accept advice from you, I'm not going to accept criticism from you either. And the watch time for those videos are all under a minute, so I'm really not going to take it when you haven't even heard the whole damn thing. So eventually, you'll all go away. I mean, I doubt you even hear at the end of this video. And I'll move on. I think it's mostly the parasocial aspect of the situation that's people so angry. They either feel like Creepshow was a friend and her behavior was a betrayal, or they are connecting with the other people in this issue and they feel like what I said is a direct derogatory statement towards them, and it's not. The funniest part is just all of the criticism on the experiment part, because it wasn't a sanctioned experiment for school or for a real study. This is something I did for me, for fun, so yeah, sorry if it wasn't entirely up to code. And it's the same thing with any kind of fiction. Like, the title said what was in it, you clicked on it, it's no different than it had been a troll video. The only difference is that I used the data for something afterwards. So feel free to continue bitching. It doesn't make a difference to me. I don't really care what you think of me because you all have only seen one tiny aspect of me, this one little video series. You haven't watched the rest of my videos. You don't know anything about me. You don't know where I came from or what's going on in my life. So you have no right to pass judgment on me, and you can do it all you want, but it's not going to mean anything to me.